What's up, guys? We're going to choose podcast. My name is Salman Ali at Salman Ali NBA on Twitter. You're joined by the very first guest of my video podcasting journey, Adam Spolane of Sports Radio 610. Adam, how you doing?
Whenever you want to do a video podcast, I'm definitely the first guest that you want to have on. There's no question about that.
Yeah, we're both not good at this tech stuff at all. It's like it's a pain. It's really a hassle.
Yeah, it doesn't help when you're not very smart like me. So
No, I'm not very smart either. I used to do these podcasts through the phone, and now I'm just having to do it this way. Yeah. I mean, I guess this is what it's gonna be now. It's just we got to get used to this. I mean, I guess I got used to Zoom press conferences. I can get used to this.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. So for the past 5 years, I've made my annual trek out to Las Vegas for NBA Summer League, and I bring all my podcasting equipment. I get a hotel room, and I set up camp in like the Cox Pavilion. Like, in fact, I think Adam, you and I actually recorded an emergency podcast at the Vegas airport after the Westbrook for Chris Paul trade.
Yep, that's right. Nice, right before we got on the red eye.
Yeah, it was definitely something I don't think either of us expected. We thought it was a possibility. We didn't think it was going to happen that day, like that specific timing. And it happened literally during the middle of a Rockets Summer League game. I was there, and like I had to leave the arena to like just make sure I was reading the notifications correctly on my phone. But that's Summer League though. That's just the vibe. Like, it's just crazy stuff can happen during Summer League. There's executives, players, coaches. They're all just walking around. They're all easily accessible. It's like it's really hard to describe, but you have to go out there if you're an NBA fan. It's like a once in a lifetime experience, and it's like one of those things where like you can kind of compare it to All-Star Weekend, but it's not like All-Star Weekend in that everybody's accessible. You can just walk down. I think you can buy a ticket and just walk down and like onto the floor and like sit down courtside or something, and like you can like talk to like the executives if they actually want to talk to you, of course.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's quite like you can't just like walk onto the floor, but you can get into the arena, and I believe you can sit anywhere
you can get close enough.
Yeah. Though it's Summer League, so I don't know how much you actually want to do that. It's basketball.
No, you don't want to get onto the actual floor. But what I'm saying is like these guys are so easy to access. You can find them inside casinos, hotel rooms. You can find them in the hallways of the arena, and they're just walking around. And like a lot of them are so easy to spot because they're all like 6'8" and above. And it's crazy. It's just something I would definitely recommend, especially if you work in sports. Like, it's a great networking opportunity. I get a lot of email, I'm sure you do too, about people trying to break into the business, and I always recommend go out to Summer League at least once, make some connections. It's a nice place to go network.
Yeah, literally the whole league is there. Media, executives, players. It's somewhat similar to the baseball winter meetings, except the big difference is that there's games going on and the players are actually there. The players usually don't show up to the baseball winter meetings. It's all execs and media and agents. But for this, it's players and it's basically every single. Like, you look at the Rockets, they basically had every single player in Vegas on the roster except for one. I mean, that's just how much the whole league just converges on this one event every single summer.
Yeah, I'm a little worried that these top prospects are going to start like opting out after a couple games. Like, it's just going to be the norm now. But my hope is that these top guys just came out because of injuries, right? Like, this is a little different than like them just like saying, okay, we're going to shut these guys down for load management or something. Like Paolo Banchero actually got hurt, right? And same thing with Jaden Ivey. So like, I'm sure that's what I would have done. I would have shut them down after that. But I'm worried that they might take that opportunity to take it one step further. I'm going to play my 2 games, then I'm done. I've done my duties, or I'm going to play 1 game, then I'm going to leave. Like, that's the worry. But in general, you'll be able to see the top prospects if you get out there early enough.
I mean, in all honesty, it's not the players' call. I mean, they are so early in their careers that this is the team's call. Play this game, we'll play that game, we'll play this game. And then maybe we'll shut you down after the 3rd game or after the 4th game. Kind of all depending on what it is. But it's not the most important thing in the world, but it's good just to get these guys out there, get them playing under NBA rules for the first time, get them with not all the guys, but some of the guys that they're going to play with. once you get to the regular season. And it's a good chance to get a look at maybe some guys that you don't know all that well, whether it's guys who were with you in the G League last year in the past, or guys that you simply didn't draft and you kind of liked out of college.
Yeah, and like there's a bunch of scouts there. Obviously, if some of these guys aren't going to make the team, so they might be scouted for international prospects or other teams. Like it's definitely an event, and it's really fun. I enjoyed it a lot, especially those first couple of days. The last couple of days end up being kind of a drag, especially after the prospects come out. But it's fun. So, anyways, I go every year, and this year I decide not to attend because I came back from vacation. And like this was like a day or two before summer league started, and I was just too tired to hop onto a flight and spend a few days there. Adam, you were there. First of all, did you win any money?
No.
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 Did you try?
Of course I tried, but
Okay. All right. Yeah.
there's a reason why all those hotels get built every single year.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun. I mean, listen, like I don't have the best of luck, but I do try my hand at blackjack, at roulette. And I don't spend too much time there when I'm there for summer league, but it's definitely interesting to see like Chandler Parsons at the table across from you, just with like a crowd of people around him as he's trying to play craps. It's funny.
And throwing around lots of money, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah. That particular time, yeah, he was. So the Rockets had 3 first-round picks this year, including third overall pick Jabari Smith Jr. They had 4 last year, including second overall pick Jalen Green. I got to be honest with you, the Rockets were kind of a hard watch this year for Summer League, and that's not to say it wasn't an important crop of talent for them. It was just different. Like the Cade versus Jalen thing was very much top of mind, and Jalen was making a very compelling case for the number 1 overall pick, like just based off of how he was playing. And then off to the side, Alperen Şengün was like very loudly introducing himself to most of the basketball world. Those first 2 games last year felt like a show because we were being introduced to like the future offensive anchors of the organization. And this year, other than the last 2 games of like Jabari Smith Jr., like it kind of felt like the opposite. It very much felt like we were being introduced to like the defensive anchors, the glue guys, like players like Smith and Tari Eason, who are obviously very important to the organization and could end up becoming stars in their roles. And in Smith's case, that all-star ceiling is real, but it's more of like a supportive star kind of vibe in comparison to Green and Şengün. And last year, again, it felt like a show. And this year kind of felt like a little bit of fun homework, again, because you're watching basketball, but it wasn't the same. Did you get that kind of vibe in the arena? Like, am I making any sense to you when you're watching the games? How did it feel? Like, was there like that same large swath of people there to see Jalen Green, to go see Jabari?
I think that there were probably more people at Summer League this year than there were last year. And I'll be honest with you, I was at the first Rocket Summer League game last year, so I believe they played Cleveland, and that was terrible basketball. I mean, it was a terrible basketball game. And Summer League
games, but it felt like a show, right?
I mean, it's Summer League and it does feel like a show when you have the top picks out there because those are the guys who everybody wants to see. But the basketball is never good. I mean, you're basically throwing together a roster, letting them practice for 5 days, and then sending them out into a game, and it usually doesn't go all that well. So I don't think that this Summer League was any different than last Summer League. I do think that it was a little bit different with Jalen Green just because of the athleticism and some of the things that he can do. You're not going to see Jabari Smith do that. You're not going to see Jabari Smith just like glide through the air and throw down huge dunks the way that Jalen Green did. But I was at the game on Saturday. It was Oklahoma City. So you had Chet Holmgren and Josh Giddey against the Rockets guys. And the first game that day went really long. That was that Kings game that went to overtime. And then there was a Detroit-Washington game that was also going long. And Detroit, it was Washington who was fouling guys at the end of the game to try and extend it, to try and come from behind to win the game. And the crowd is booing because this game is taking long and they want to see Chet against Jabari. So I thought that it was the same show this past season or this past weekend as it is for every Summer League that involves the top players.
Here comes curmudgeon Adam out here saying this is bad basketball, not enjoyable to watch.
It's not great basketball. I mean, it just isn't.
It's not, but it's fun.
It's like, fun.
It can be bad, but it can be fun.
Yeah, you're seeing guys on an NBA floor, essentially an NBA floor that you haven't really seen before, It's interesting to see the guys try and come together. And I do think that the Rockets, you've seen some gradual improvement over these 4 games just because they played together a little bit. I mean, like I said, they threw together a roster and they practiced for, I believe, 5 days in Houston before they flew out to Vegas. They practiced on the off days, except for Tuesdays. So they had a practice when they got to Vegas on Wednesday. They practiced on Friday. They practiced on Sunday as well, and then they practiced Wednesday before the game last night. So you see them get some work in. You're trying to familiarize all these guys with what they're going to be expected to do once they get into camp in September, and then you're trying to get a look at some other guys just to see if they might have a future with your organization.
Well, anyways, like the point I was trying to make before you went all old man yells at cloud on me was like the crop of players this year feels very different from the crop of players last year. Like last year they were drafting very much offensive first talent, and this year it was very much defensive first talent. Like it was very much like supporting guys, like guys who fit in, make a lot of sense, logical picks, right? And the games were like different. Like the games were like in last year it felt very much like, okay, whoever scores the most is going to end up winning the game. This year it felt like, okay, whoever keeps their opponent under 90 points is going to win the game. It felt very different, and like it was a different type of kind of feel just watching it on TV. Obviously it's different. You were actually there. You might have got a different experience. It just felt like when I went to a Jalen Green game, there was a giant like crowd behind me wanting to go watch Jalen Green because of part of it is because Jalen did a lot of talking too. Ahead of last year's summer league. I'm not sure if you remember, like he like trash talked the city of Detroit. He talked about how he deserved to go number 1, and like Jabari didn't really do much of that. He just kind of did the typical vanilla player quote stuff, and it was different.
Yeah, I just think that there was the same sort of anticipation with the game that I saw, or with the first game that I saw with Oklahoma City and the Rockets is what I saw last year when it was Cleveland and the Rockets. I mean, there is still you had the two of the top 3 picks in the draft. You had the fans in the arena wanting that game to start and wanting the game before it to end. So I think that just from the way that the crowd reacted to it, I mean, there was a huge crowd on Saturday for that game. There wasn't as much of a crowd on Monday, but there was an absolutely huge crowd on Saturday for that game. So I still think there was the same anticipation, just maybe from a Rocket sense it was different because Jalen Green was the number 2 pick in the draft, and the Rockets hadn't had a first-round pick in, a half dozen years almost. So I think that's why maybe it would have felt different from the Rocket side of things last year, just because you had a top pick, whereas, this year it kind of felt like, okay, it's business as usual. Here we go, another top pick.
Yeah, and it was kind of different, right? Like Jalen gets the ball early in possessions, right? And Jabari, you kind of have to wait for him to get his opportunities. Yeah. It was just different,
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about Jabari Smith. So he starts off offensively a little slow, right? Defensively, you really saw those chops early on. Can switch onto the perimeter, really versatile, blocked a lot of shots. The instincts on defense are definitely there. And he shows promise of eventually becoming a good rim protector one day. Maybe he could potentially slide down to center. But, the switchability that was advertised with him is there. It's there. He can really defend out there on the perimeter, and he has a hell of a motor on him. And shots just weren't going in. It happens. Sometimes they go in, sometimes they weren't. And I also felt like the first 2 games were very much dominated by Josh Christopher, which they should be dominated by Josh Christopher. He's a second-year player. He was the established guy. He was playing well. I thought so. Even though he didn't shoot the ball well that second game, I thought he was playing pretty well. And he was very much the guy for the Rockets. And Jabari Smith Jr. was kind of when that happens in summer league, when a guard's just kind of commanding so much offense like that, guys like Jabari Smith Jr. kind of get pushed off to the side. Very natural, not something I didn't anticipate could happen. And when you're not making your shots and you're pretty much only touching the ball like when you're expected to shoot a spot up 3, and you don't. That's what happens. You have kind of rough offensive games. But then he picks it up, right? The third game, he really starts hitting his shots. He had like 19 points with like 0 dribbles or something, something ridiculous. Really starts hitting his threes, gets to the free throw line, and shows people what kind of prospect that others were envisioning when they were putting him at the top of their board, right? Like that kind of number one overall type of prospect. And that last game, I thought it was actually more impressive than that third game because he was doing stuff off the dribble, right? Like more impressive things, like in terms of one dribble pull-ups, obviously, but the spin move to the bank shot to driving into contact to getting to the free throw line. Like I think at the end of the game, he got 7 free throw attempts, and he made he made 0 threes. He was 0 for 5 from 3, and he still produced offensively while still being that impact defensive player that we talked about earlier. Like he was, I thought, really impressive. And that kind of player, if he can become that, right, at the NBA level, which is really hard to do, just judging off of his limited ball handling ability right now. But if he can become an advanced enough ball handler to where he's actually able to do the stuff he did in that last game, the Rockets should be pretty happy with what they got at number 3. What was your impression of Jabari?
I think the Rockets are going to be happy regardless. I mean, he's really talented. You got to see all the things that he was really good at, and he was probably the best defender in the entire draft. And he's the best defender and probably the best perimeter defender in the entire draft. And that's as a guy who's athletic and can guard pretty much any.
Sorry, you're cutting off. Can you say it again?
So I think that they're going to be happy with him regardless, just because he went into the draft. He was probably the best defender in the entire draft, probably the best perimeter defender in the entire draft. And he's 6'10". He's really long. He's switchable, as he said. The offense, I don't necessarily, the offense will come, and he's going to have plenty of opportunities to get open looks. He's going to have some of the best. He's going to have at least one of the best guards probably in the league, Jalen Green, who can help create offense for him. He'll have to learn how to cut a little bit. He'll have to kind of pick up on those instincts. But I do think that the one thing that I've heard about him is just the competitiveness, and how I think that is something that's really going to will go over to the rest of his teammates. And you saw him diving on the floor in the Oklahoma City game, trying to steal a possession as that game was coming down into crunch time. He did a really good job to get Holmgren in that game. I just think they have to be thrilled with what they got for him. And he's a different prospect. He's a different kind of prospect for a guy who was drafted 3rd in the draft and who was thought of being, who was going to be the top pick in the draft right up until about a half hour before, just because he's probably not going to be a guy who averages 20 a game. And I was talking to an exec from a team who picked in the top 10, and he told me that they had Jabari Smith number 1 on their board, and they kind of had him on their board number 1, knowing that he will probably never average 20 in a game. But he's an elite defender. He's an elite knockdown shooter, those are skills, especially for a big, that you really want to have in today's NBA. And he just does makes all those little plays that contribute to winning basketball games. And the Rockets don't need a 30-point a game score because they have Jalen Green over there. They have some other guys. They'll have Kevin Porter Jr. They have plenty of cap space moving forward to try and add other scores to the roster. So they needed an elite defender. You need guys like that. You need guys who are going to spread the floor for you, and he's exactly what they want. So I think he's a perfect fit for what they want to do. He's the perfect fit for how they want to play, and I think that he showed that over these 4 games in Vegas.
Yes, but I think if he were to become a better ball handler, if he were to do some of the stuff that many people think he can become, right? Like, so the way I think of Jabari Smith Jr. is like the floor is Rashard Lewis, which Rashard Lewis is a very damn good, like a pretty damn good basketball player, like 2-time All-Star, like a good defensive player, like one of the very first like stretch versatile 4s, right? Like guy who was actually taking like 4, 5, 6 attempts from beyond the 3-point line for the Orlando Magic. Really got unlocked midway through his career, so you kind of have that question, what if teams actually played him at power forward and played him and had him shoot more threes early on? What would have happened? But that's kind of like the floor. If Jabari ends up being that, like that's an awesome fit for next to Alperen Şengün, Jalen Green. Like those guys are gonna create for others and score. And all he has to do is kind of fit in and be the ultimate role player, like a supersized role player that ends up having all-star impact, right? And that's kind of what I view as like, okay, that's a realistic. If that's your comp, I'm okay with that. LaMarcus Aldridge kind of like a median outcome for him, I would say. That pull up to he loves getting to it. Obviously, that's one of his favorite moves. loves pulling up from two, and he obviously at the college level loved fading away from two. And if he can advance some of that ball handling just a little bit, doesn't have to get too crazy, but if he advances that ball handling a little bit to where he's not getting stripped as regularly or dribbling it off his foot, I think that kind of median outcome is very achievable for him. And I think that's kind of the player, if LaMarcus Aldridge with the 3-pointer and defensive versatility, right? That kind of player is extremely valuable in the modern NBA. And the ceiling, I'm not going to go Kevin Durant. Like, I think that was absolutely bananas that people were comparing him to Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is like one of the best ball handlers for that size ever. Maybe the best ball handler for that size ever. He was a shooting guard coming out of college. That's where PJ Carlesimo placed him. Maybe that's because he didn't know how to use him, but that just kind of tells you like the guy could handle the basketball really well, really advanced coming out of college. Jabari is not that, but can he become Paul George? Right, like that's like the ceiling, ultimate. If he hits all of his boxes, if he becomes a better ball handler, Paul George obviously came out of the draft, was not the best ball handler. If he becomes a better ball handler, if he can pull up off the dribble for those jumpers, if he can display craft with his footwork, like he had the spin move last night, if he can do all that and like really maximize his abilities as a switch defender, and can play 3 through 5, like that's Paul George. Right, like that's a hell of a valuable basketball player. That's probably he's probably unlikely to reach that ceiling, but that's kind of how I view like floor Rashard Lewis, median outcome LaMarcus Aldridge with a 3-pointer and versatility defensively, and ceiling kind of Paul George. And if that's how you view Jabari Smith Jr. as a prospect, I think that's a healthy way of viewing him as opposed to the Kevin Durant stuff, which was kind of really getting out of hand before the draft, and it made me uncomfortable because watching him, I never got that feel.
I disagree with the floor, just because you're comparing him to Rashard Lewis, and offensively that makes sense, but already he's a much better defender than Rashard Lewis ever was. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, just with the uniqueness of the prospect.
He's a better defender, but not
exactly.
much better. Like
Rashard Lewis
not
never,
much better.
Rashard Lewis can guard people. That wasn't the strength of his
game. He could.
It was okay. To me,
he was a big reason that Orlando defense was like top in the NBA in 2008 and like through 2010. Like that Orlando defense hinged on Rashard and Dwight in that back line. Obviously, Dwight carrying more of that work, but Rashard was very capable of defending multiple positions.
Dwight covered up a lot of their issues defensively. To me,
but you're acting like Dwight alone made them a top defense in the NBA when like they had Tito Turkoglu out there. You think Tito Turkoglu was out there like making them additionally good defensively? They also had to have good Jameer Nelson. Like somebody else on that team had to be good defensively. It was Rashard Lewis.
It was Dwight. Come on.
It wasn't one player can't anchor a defense like that, dude. Like it's not like that. That's why
Utah has always been very good. Utah was always good defensively because Rudy Gobert was there anchoring things. I mean,
but they weren't as good when they didn't have good defensive players, though. Like last year, they didn't have that many good defensive players, and they barely reached the top 10. It gets you into the top 10. Like one player can get you there, but you need multiple players to get you above that level, which is where Orlando was. Like Rashard Lewis was a good defender. He wasn't. I think Jabari Smith Jr. I agree, he is a better defender, but not much better. Like like Rashard Lewis, like midway through his career, became a plus defender, and Dwight was obviously the linchpin, but he was very good and very helpful towards them becoming an NBA Finals team.
I'm just saying, to me, Jabari Smith is Aaron Gordon if Aaron Gordon could shoot, or he is like Michael Porter, or he is Michael Porter if Michael Porter could defend. That's kind of the comp that I have for Jabari Smith right now, is that he is Aaron Gordon if Aaron Gordon could shoot, or he is Michael Porter Jr. if Michael Porter Jr. could defend. So that's kind of what you're working with just as a baseline for Jabari Smith. Will the ball handling stuff come? Absolutely it will. I mean, that's just simple player development, and I don't think there's any doubt that. And that's going to be one of the big things I'm sure that they work on with him is the ball handling, because that's what they're working on with all these guys right now. Because that's one of the things that's really going to be when we talk about this team getting better. They want to get better in two areas. The first is defense. The second is turnovers, because they were terrible. They were real bad at defense last year. They were also really bad at taking care of the basketball, which is why they're spending a lot of time on ball handling stuff right now this summer. So I'm sure that is something that they are going to work on with Jabari Smith, but I don't know how much he needs to actually handle the basketball, at least not right now, because they have other guys who are going to handle the basketball. And I think that you're going to see them really put the ball in the hands of Kevin Porter and put the ball in the hands of Jalen Green and let those guys go to work. And, they're not going to, I guess the best way to put it is they're not going to ask Jabari Smith to handle the basketball at this early stage. I think that's one of the things that will come as his career progresses.
Well, we agree. He doesn't have to do that for them, right? Like, he's a perfect fit as is. Like, if he hits that floor that we're kind of talking about, whether you think it's Michael Porter Jr. who can defend, which I don't think is a crazy comparison, or Rashard Lewis. I don't think if he becomes those kinds of players, I think that's not a bad like him just going in floor and like reaching his floor. It's not bad, but to reach the median or the ceiling, the LaMarcus Aldridge I was talking about, or the Paul George I was talking about, that's where the ball handling does have to improve, right? Like, that's where this is not like the ball handling is something that he's going to have to really, really work on. And yes, I agree that they're obviously going to work on that with him. That's, player development. Of course, everybody works on ball handling, but the baseline that you start with is important, right? Like, Paolo Banchero is starting with a much higher baseline than Jabari, and same thing with like a lot of players. I'm not. It's not a fair comparison. But what I'm saying is everybody his age is going to be working on ball handling. But so this idea that yes, he's going to work on it, but everybody else is going to work on it as well. So that rate of improvement is not. It's you're going to equal out, or you're going to reach a point where, like, unless you're really killing it and you display outlier player development, you have kind of a ceiling. Or you have kind of it's very hard for you to reach that ceiling. And that's why I think it's perfectly healthy to view him as that, guy who doesn't have to be the 20-point a game scorer. But as long as you recognize that if you're expecting him to be more, you're expecting him to display some outlier player development, that's fine. You can project that. Everyone's allowed to project that with anybody. But as of right now, that is going to be something that he struggles with. But I think, I feel like saying all this makes me sound like a hater. I like Jabari Smith Jr. Like, I think he's a very good basketball player, and I think he could make an all-star team or two with just what he ends up becoming right now, his floor outcome. But, I just think that, a scout once told me, like, listen, like, you can say he's going to work on it. He's going to work on it. He's going to work on it. But everybody else is also going to work on it. So you have to keep that in mind as you talk about these guys.
But would you rather have the elite defender, or would you rather have the elite ball handler, especially for this team?
The elite ball handler.
I would much rather have the elite defender.
In general, elite ball handler. Because offensive basketball players are more important than defensive basketball players. Just always. NBA history, yeah.
So let me ask you something. In today's NBA, the two teams that played in the finals, Golden State and Boston, they finished 1-2 in defensive efficiency last season. So you're starting to see that it's really nice to have high-level defenders, and especially once you get into April, May, and June. Defense is what wins those games. And so you look at the teams that were playing for the championship last year, they were all elite defensive teams. So for me, I want the guy
on a team level, of course,
yes,
but we're talking about as an individual level. Like of course you need to have a good team defense, but it is easier to cobble together a good team defense with role players than it is to cobble together a good offense with role players. It's very hard to do that with just role players. You can do that. You can manage to pull that off with defensive players. Like the Rockets did that at one point. Like they got Clint Capella and PJ Tucker and like Trevor Ariza, like good defensive role players, and they were like a top 5 defense in the NBA. Like you can do that. You can't do it the other way around. Like you may be able to do it one season, but not consistently. Like the Atlanta Hawks did it one season, right, with Mike Budenholzer, but they didn't do it for a consistent stretch, because that's very difficult to achieve.
I mean, I guess, but it's not. They have other guys who can handle the basketball. So if I can get this elite 6'10"
Oh,
defender,
you're cutting off. Can you say it again? I'm sorry.
so I think that I don't think it's necessarily that big. I mean, I would, for me, I would much rather have the elite 6'10" defender who can guard everyone 1 through 5 and can do it at a really high level and can make shots from the outside, especially on a team that has guards already, or at least they have the one guard and they will have the ability to add other guards. You can't just find a guy who, for me, is 6'10" and can guard everybody on the floor. I just think that it's really hard to find guys like that, and he can also shoot the ball. Like, if he couldn't shoot the ball,
it is harder to find a 6'10" ball handler, though. It's harder to find a 6'10" ball handler as polished.
I just don't know if they need it at this point.
No. You and I agree. Here's in terms of needs for this team, Jabari fits better than Paolo. I agree. We're talking about as we rate them as prospects, and when you rate them out as prospects, I'm taking the guy that's 6'10", polished ball handler and can facilitate for others over Jabari any day of the week. But that doesn't necessarily make the other guy bad. It just makes one guy clearly more important to winning basketball.
I don't think it's a clear thing. And just talking to people who were in Vegas, I mentioned this already. You had one team that was picking in the top 10 saying they had Jabari Smith over Paolo Banchero. I didn't hear anyone else tell me, yeah, we had Paolo Banchero over Jabari Smith. I didn't hear nobody from another team said that to me. So I do think that the Banchero stuff is nice and he's really talented and he's going to be really good. But in terms of contributing to winning basketball games, I would rather have Jabari Smith.
I will come back to this in 5 years, I guess. I mean, I'm taking Paolo. I'm sorry. I just that guy is so difficult to find out there in the wild, just someone who can handle the basketball like that, actually burden some offensive workload. And that doesn't mean, again, I don't want to come off as a hater. That doesn't mean Jabari's not valuable, right? It's just relative to that guy, I think he's less valuable, at least a little bit. But we spent too much time on him. I want to talk about Tari Eason, because Tari Eason was a guy that just last week, going on draft night, I was like, damn, so Easton makes sense for the Rockets. I 100% agree that he makes a lot of sense. But man, I wish they would have taken Malachi Branham there. I like Malachi Branham a lot. I think he slots in pretty well next to for Houston. But obviously, a lot of people had Tari Eason as this kind of fringe lottery guy. Some even had him in the lottery. And I was talking to this analytics guy last week, works for an NBA team. He told me, and I'm not going to say where he had him on his board because I think he'd be pretty upset if I said that. These guys keep this stuff really proprietary. But he had him in his top 10. And the guy was just a highly impactful defensive player at the college level, apparently, and it really showed up on the modeling systems, because Tari Eason was a giant analytics darling, and it's hilarious how they midway through the first round they took the analytics darling again, last year with Chengu and this year with Easton. But anyways, I took that, I kept that in mind as I was watching their summer league games, and Tari Eason is absolutely killing it. He's absolutely killing it. Missed a couple layups last night, but in general, the impact defensively, his anticipation in the passing lanes, his athleticism is just you see it. You see it in summer league, and it really comes off to you, right? That's one of the first things you notice, how athletic he is and how well built he is for the modern NBA, and his ability to get out in transition, run on offense and on defense. His IQs, I think the guy is playing like a lottery level talent right now. He looks like a killer pick for Houston at 16.
I would love to see the reaction in the Rockets draft room when Easton fell to them, because he is perfect for them. He does all those little things that you really want. He knows how to find his areas on the floor, especially offensively. He knows where to be. He knows where to be in the right place. If the jump shot can ever get consistent, then he's got a chance to be a really special player for them. You already talked about the defense. I mean, LSU was an elite defensive team this past season, and he was a big reason for it. And he started his college career, I believe, with Cincinnati. So he kind of just joined LSU, and he really fit into that program really well. So yeah, I do think that he's perfect for them. I thought that was kind of a perfect guy for them when that spot came up. I know that they liked him obviously they liked him right before the draft, and everything that you saw from him, everything that you've seen from him so far, tells you he's going to be a pretty impactful guy for them moving forward.
And the shooting improvement he made from his freshman year to sophomore year was real. It was killer. It was like he went up like 23% free throw percentage, and like went up from like a low 30s 3-point shooter to like mid 30s. And like that is pretty unheard of in 1 year of development, and like that just shows you the guy's a hard worker. He took in his weaknesses and made them strengths. Like he is a legitimate 3-and-D forward with lots of length. The guy is huge, like long arms, perfect for the modern NBA. And more importantly for the Rockets conversation, it really, in addition to Jabari, it helps insulate Alperen Şengün defensively. Right, they're really surrounding him with like high-level, impactful defenders that can make up for what Şengün potentially isn't, in the future. And like I think next they're really setting it up for him to succeed. Right, like if he's going to succeed, it's not because of his environment. If Şengün is a star, it's not like if he's not a star, it's not because the Rockets didn't do everything in their ability to foster that kind of environment. Like they have done a very good job at putting defenders at all 5 positions except for Jalen Green, obviously. And I think next year is going to be a really fun year for Alperen Şengün, man. I'm writing about it right now, but next year is really going to be, just for me at least, like Şengün's going to be a player to watch in terms of he gets the starting spot. The runway is clear for him. He's got all these defenders surrounding him, and the floor is going to be more, better spaced. Obviously, he's going to have a ton of passing options when he looks out onto the perimeter from the high post. And I can't wait to watch him next year.
Yeah, they're like you said, they're going to have shooters all around. I mean, whether it's Porter or Green, or we'll see what they do at the 3 with Gordon, or even
KPJ.
Yeah, there are a lot of different options that they have. Easton is a guy who you can't forget about him when he's on the floor, just because he's going to find the right place to be, and Şengün is going to be able to find him as well. I think that's what's kind of interesting about pairing those two together, is that Easton's going to find holes in the defense, and Şengün has the ability to get him the ball in those holes basically on every spot of the floor. So that's impactful. I do think with Easton it gives you, and Jabari at the same time, it gives you a little bit of versatility where, I mean, you've seen them start Smith at center in these summer league games, and they've had Easton next to him at the 4. I think that you can kind of go with Şengün at the 5, Smith at the 4, Easton at the 3, and then if you want to downsize, I think that can work as well. So I think it provides them with a lot of lineup options that they can go with whenever the season starts, not just this next season, but seasons after that.
I mean, can you imagine like hit-ahead passes from Şengün to Easton? Because Easton leaks out a ton. Right, like once the defensive possession's over, Easton's out there on the break. And can you imagine like Şengün grabbing the board and just throwing it to him in transition? Like that's going to be a really fun tandem.
Well, the Easton leak out thing is nice, but they got to make sure that they actually control the rebound, and that's another area where they have to get a lot better at this next season is rebounding. They were 25th or 26th in defensive rebounding. It was a big reason why they were such a poor defensive team. So that all that stuff that you're talking about is nice. They really need to focus on making sure that they actually get the rebound before we start getting into push ahead passes.
What'd you think of the backup point guard battle between Taitai Washington and Dayton Nix? Because I got to be honest, like I get why people are intrigued by Dayton Nix. I find it very hard to buy into. I get it. Like he's long, he's strong. He really can get to the basket whenever he wants. The finishing ability is just not there. The shooting is, it's fine. I don't know what it's gonna take. Like I don't believe in the passing. I don't know what it's gonna take for him to really like sell me. I'm not the biggest Dayton Nix fan, and at the same time, I wasn't the biggest Taitai fan. But Taitai, like at least like resembles like a normal point guard. Like, right, he makes like point guard plays. He's very good at offense organization, right? And like you saw that even in spurts at the summer league. He didn't. It's not like he had this crazy high usage or anything. But like when he did get the ball, he did a pretty good job at like getting others involved and kind of organizing whatever offense he had, at the time. And I would be interesting to see what kind of what decision Houston makes at that backup point guard spot, because there's going to be minutes there. I mean, obviously the bulk of the minutes are going to go to KPJ, Jalen Green, and Josh Christopher at the guard spots. But after that, I mean, there's a spot there for someone to go out there and earn it. So I'd be interested to see where the Rockets decide to go with that. Like, what'd you think of that battle?
I know the Rockets are absolutely thrilled with what Nix has done over the course of the summer. They are very, very high on him. I know he had.
Are you?
Yeah, I became more and more sold on him during Summer League. He did not have a good game on Thursday. He did not play well in that first game against Orlando. But in the 2 games after that I was at, I thought he was really good. I thought he was really good, really impactful. He's got elite vision as a point guard. I think he's a really good passer too. He made some passes in those 2 games that very few players can actually make. And I would really like to see, because they didn't play together very much last year, but obviously Porter and Green are going to start together. I want to see how much they stagger those 2, because I think that you could have a really good backcourt duo with Green and with Nix, because just Nix's ability to get guys the ball, I think, is very, very underrated. And when Green and Nix played together, it was only 36 minutes, so the sample size is really small, but they had an offensive rating of 115.4 in those minutes, which is as good as it gets offensively. So I really want to see those 2 play together. I think it's going to be hard for Washington to get minutes, at least early on, because I think that they know who their top 4 guards are right now. I think it's going to be Porter and Green, and then Christopher and Nix coming off the bench. So I'm not sure exactly where Washington fits here in year 1. I do think, obviously, I know they like him. I know they had him rated a whole lot higher than 29th. I think he's got a chance to be really good. I think he's a really smart player. He's similar to Porter in a way where he can play point guard, he can get to the basket, he can create his own shot for himself. So I know that they like him. I think that if he were a couple inches taller, then I think that maybe draft day is a little bit different for him. But I think right now, for me, the guard depth chart, at least at point guard, it's Porter 1, and then it's Nix 2. And we'll see what happens, because it's not like Porter's spot on this team has been solidified in the future. I mean, he's a free agent at the end of the season. I don't know what they're going to do there. I don't think that they're going to extend him before the season. I know I wouldn't extend him before the season, but if you told me that it's possible that the 2 point guards of the future of this team are Daishen Nix and Taitai Washington, I would not be at all surprised.
Yeah, I am kind of. It is kind of an underrated storyline that Kevin Porter Jr. hasn't got extended yet. It is something that we talked a lot about heading into the offseason, whether or not that would happen, and it hasn't happened. And just like no one's really talking about it. But yeah, I view Taitai very similar to you. We could not disagree more about Daishen Nix, but it's just like I think that's going to be a position that Houston plays with in the future, right? I don't think there's an obvious answer there. I think Houston's gonna have to get a look at all 3 of these guys and decide, which one they like. Maybe it's none of them. Maybe they have to, go get that guy later on. Not all these decisions are made in the draft, or not all these guys. Like they might have to go acquire a free agent or make a trade or something. This is one of those things where team building is not always like a perfect. Okay, we get this guy in the draft, then we get this guy, then we get this guy, then we're done. Like maybe if you're the Spurs, it happens like that sometimes. But even the Spurs, they went out and got Boris Diaw in free agency, right? Like they play the free agency game a little bit. So it's one of those things where I will be very interested to see what Houston does at point guard.
Well, and also remember, I mean, they're going to have another premium pick in this draft. They are not going to win a lot of games. I think that they would be lucky to get to 28 if they're really trying to win all those games, and they're not going to down the stretch in all likelihood. The rest of the West is going to be so much better than they are, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So they're going to add a premium pick. They're going to have a ton of cap space this summer and the summer after that. So this roster, obviously, it's not set by any stretch of the imagination. They're going to have the ability to improve it in other ways. So the guys that they have now, that's not going to necessarily be their team 2 or 3 years from now.
So, by the way, did you want to make a wager on that win total? I actually think they're going to be a little bit better than you think. I think they can get to 30. I think that's a possibility. You want to put a wager on that?
Absolutely. Go
Okay,
ahead.
yeah, I'm game. I'm game
Name your
because like
price.
I really do. Okay, we'll talk about it off the air. I'm game though. I think Şengün's gonna be a little bit better. I think Jalen Green's gonna be obviously more confident in his role. I think that extended stretch to end last season. I think he's gonna continue that going into start this season. And if he's that guy, and if Şengün is who I think he could be, I think that a lot of this is me betting on Şengün, right? And the Rockets doing a good job of insulating him defensively. And if all that happens, I think they're gonna make some real strides here. I think I really like what they're doing. Like I really do. Like it makes a lot of logical sense to me. The one guy that it's a little bit of a conundrum to me is like what they're doing with Cam Porter. But aside from that, like I understand what they're doing. I see the vision. I kind of believe what Rafael is selling here. I wrote about it last week. Oh no, this week. Like that vision, the puzzle pieces, all that stuff, it's starting to fit together and make sense when you take a step back. Some of the individual decisions I may have disagreed with here and there, but more broadly, it makes sense. And like I think you're going to see a lot of coalesce together because at some point these impact players that they're taking at the top of the draft have to make an impact, and they have to accelerate some of their wins, right? They have to win at least a little bit more. And I think they won 20 games last year. Betting that they win 10 more games, I'm game for that. I think they can.
I mean, fine with me. Here's my question. I'm with you. I think that what they've done the last 2 years makes a lot of sense, and I think the moves have been really smart. But I'm going to name the teams in the West. I want you to tell me, are the Rockets, just yes or no, are the Rockets better than this team? Phoenix.
No.
Memphis.
No.
Golden State.
No.
Dallas.
No.
Utah.
No. Well, hold on. We don't know. Utah is a star. Let's put a star next to Utah. We don't know. Depends
Denver.
on what happens with Donovan Mitchell. No.
Minnesota.
No.
New Orleans.
No.
The Clippers.
No.
San Antonio.
Maybe. Yeah, I'd say they're going to be better than San Antonio.
The Lakers.
The Lakers. No, they're not going to be better than the Lakers.
Sacramento.
I'm going to say no.
Portland.
No.
Oklahoma City.
Yes.
I mean, I think I would say Oklahoma City is better today than the Rockets are, but
is that because of Shea?
Yeah, I mean, they have an all-star quality guard, plus they have a few more veterans on their team than the Rockets have. But basically, I'm running through this because I'm going through all these teams in the West, and I can only pick one team that the Rockets are going to be better than this next season. That's why I'm not saying they're going to win a lot more games than they did last year, just because the West is going to be so much better. And all these teams in the West are going to be.
How many did I pick?
You said 30. Or how many did you say the Rockets would be better than? I think you said the Rockets might be better. You said Utah. Put a star on Utah, depending on what happens with Mitchell. You said Oklahoma City. You said San Antonio. For me, it's just San Antonio.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and I think the bad teams this year aren't going to be really, really bad. I think there's going to be more of a dispersion there. I think you're probably going to – the worst team in the NBA might win 25 games this year as opposed to, really, again, like the one question mark there is Utah. So I don't want to say the worst team in the NBA might win 25 games. Like, Utah might be pretty bad depending on what they trade Mitchell for. But, yeah. I do think there's going to be more of a dispersion there in the wins in general at the bottom of the NBA.
I will go under 30 wins for the Rockets.
Okay, I say 30. I say, and we'll talk. We'll come back to this. Listen, I will come back. You'll come on the show again. I'll eat crow. I don't mind. This is fun for me. Okay, so let's talk the actual Rockets, right? The ones that are actually going to play next year. We basically know for a fact that the following players will be starting next year. Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Şengün. That's 4. We don't know who the 5th guy is. I would have suspected, it was going to be Eric Gordon, but you talked to Stephen Silas a couple of days ago about this, and he seemed to hint at the idea that Jayshawn Tate takes that spot. And first of all, I think if Eric Gordon's still on the roster, I think it's a bad idea. I'd rather start Eric Gordon. I think the floor spacing is more clear. I think Jayshawn Tate's a 4, and Jabari's a 4. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think it's going to be too cramped. And second of all, Eric Gordon already kind of wants to know where his place on the team is going to be, right? He's already started to talk about money. That interview with Tim McMahon's a great example of this, right? Like, if I'm going to be here, we need to start talking extension. And if that's the case, you pissing him off more by putting him as a bench player, I don't think it's a wise move. And if Jayshawn Tate is indeed going to be the starting, if that's what they're planning for, that to me kind of indicates that Stephen Silas might have some sort of idea from the front office that Eric Gordon has a trade lined up, or they have a trade lined up for Eric Gordon. Because otherwise, I can't envision another scenario where Jayshawn Tate starts over Eric Gordon.
Well, listen, I don't know about any of that stuff. Just when Silas was talking about it, he basically said the reason why he would, and I shouldn't, basically he wants Jayshawn Tate on the floor with Alperen Şengün, was basically his explanation. Just because he thought, and I guess it bears out from just how last year played out, when Tate was on the floor, teams would put their centers on him, and then that would kind of ruin what they wanted to do offensively. And the reason that he wants Tate on the floor with Şengün is that teams have to put their centers on Şengün. That frees things up a little bit more for Tate, because now teams can't put their center on Tate. So that's kind of the reasoning, it seems, that they want to have, that they would put Tate in the starting lineup, is to make sure that as many of his minutes as possible are shared with Şengün. I personally don't really care who starts. I don't think it's that big a deal. I've said this quite a bit over the years. Just because a guy starts doesn't mean he's one of your 5 best players. I don't think that you have to.
Well, I think the lineup has to make sense, right? Like I think like last year when they started Daniel Tice and Christian Wood, like the lineup clearly didn't make sense, and we thought that at the beginning of the season, and it bore out. Right? Like it could end up being one of those things where it's like, okay, now we don't know what to do with Daniel Tice, right? And like if they start a lineup that doesn't make sense again, like I don't understand the logic in that,
I see where it makes sense, though, I guess is the point. Because Tate's part of your team. They extended Tate. He's been a really good player for them over the last couple of years. So, and not wanting teams to put centers on him, that makes some sense. And they thought that, and Silas thought that really cramped their offense quite a bit when teams did that. So we'll see what happens, when the season starts. We'll see what happens with Gordon. We'll see what happens with everyone else. Maybe they try this out and it doesn't work. That's part of this process, is that you have to experiment with things and tweak things and see if this works, if that works. We'll see what works well together, because I do think that you look at them, and if you have Jayshawn Tate and Jabari Smith Jr. on the floor together, you have a chance to be a pretty good defense. It might not be great for your offense, but that's part of this whole process, is figuring out which 5-man lineups work well and which 5-man lineups don't work well. And, maybe last year, I think you can easily say that they probably spent a little too much time trying to figure out how things worked with Tice, but they had given Tice a good amount of money. So I think that they were kind of committed to trying to at least make that work. And I will say, as bad as the offense was with that starting lineup, the defense was actually decent. I mean, the defense completely fell off a cliff once Tice was taken out of the starting lineup. That's when they became a historically bad defense last year. But part of this is just you're experimenting. They aren't trying to necessarily win games this next season. The goal isn't to make the playoffs. The goal isn't to make the play-in. I don't think, like I said, I would be surprised if they even win 30 games this next season. But it's your chance now to see what works together and what doesn't work, and you've got some time to really experiment with some stuff.
If Jayshawn Tate is the opening day starter, I think Eric Gordon is traded before opening day, is what I'll say. I suspect that's what it means.
It's possible. Like I said, I was surprised I was a little surprised they didn't trade Gordon before the draft. It kind of felt like it was heading in that direction. But if I think one thing for Gordon that he's kind of said in the past is he just wants to know his role. He might start one game and then come off the bench the next game. And I do think that he would like to this is what he said going into last year, is that he wanted to know his role and he wanted to stay in that role. He wound up coming off the bench to start last season. It seemed like he was okay with it. I don't know for sure. But then he started after that first month of the year and was basically a fixture in the starting lineup up until they shut him down towards the end of the year. So I don't know what they plan to do with that situation. If they decide to trade him, they decide to trade him. I think that it would probably benefit them to keep him around at least a little bit longer, just because you look at their roster, they have two guys on the team who have more than 3 NBA seasons under their belt. And one is Gordon, the other is David Nwaba. Everybody else has been in the league 3 years or less. So I do think that you probably need at least one more adult in the room.
I suspect they're waiting for the trade market to get settled a little bit before they move Gordon. And maybe there's an increase in price that they can get for Gordon. You know, like if one of these teams gets KD or Donovan Mitchell, or, you know, like if a big trade happens, you know, there's going to be, at least from one of these teams, there's going to be a demand for someone like Eric Gordon. And perhaps that's where they can shoehorn in a Eric Gordon trade. But I don't know. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe they just genuinely like having him on the roster. I mean, we know for sure that, you know, Kelly Iko kind of reported again this weekend that they had multiple first-round picks at the draft, you know, offers on the table from, you know, like 4 teams or 6 teams or something like that. Like they had a handful of teams willing to give Houston a first-round pick. So I guess there's no harm in waiting till the trade deadline, but I am curious to see if that ends up actually happening. If that actually ends up, you know, they actually end up waiting until the trade deadline, or they'd make a move before opening day.
I mean, it felt like last year they were going to trade him, and then kind of got the feeling towards January and February that they weren't going to trade him. And we'll see how that goes again. I mean, this time last year, I would have said 100% he was going to be traded, and he's still on the team now. So who knows?
Yeah, I think one difference is we now know that the team that has Eric Gordon can guarantee the last year of his contract. We didn't know that up until like mid-season or like January or something of last year, of like, you know, that last year can be, you know, manually guaranteed. So he has like an extra year artificially, right? You know, that year where there was like the incentive if he wins a championship or if he makes an all-star team or something, you can still manually, you know, opt him into that year. But it has to be on the team end of things. So I guess that's the difference. And now he's technically on the last year of his contract, or the second to last year of his contract, and he still has 2 more playoff appearances left for whatever team he's on, theoretically. I guess that's the only difference. But yeah, you're right. I expect him to get traded too. That was weird.
Well, I tried to tell you once we got to February that it wasn't going to happen, but you chose not to listen to me.
I lost that bet too.
Yeah.
I lost that bet too. We'll see. We'll see what happens with this one. 30 wins. Thank you so much for coming on, Adam. Where can we find your work and your social media?
Sportsradio610.com. Just check on just click on the Rockets tab. I'll have everything that I did from Summer League. There was a story on Jabari Smith. There was a story on Stephen Silas and what improvement really means to him. We finally, you know, we've been hearing about improvement, and we're going to hear about it so much, but he kind of went a little more in depth on what he means and what he's expecting in terms of improvement throughout the season. And then I had kind of 10 thoughts just that I had from Summer League. And I also had my conversation with Stephen Silas. You can find on sportsradio610.com as well.
For sure. Be sure to follow Adam on all those handles and read all his work, of course. And we'll get to discussing how much our wager should be in a minute here. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and Stitcher. Make sure to follow the Apollo Houston YouTube channel. The link is in the description of this podcast. We've had a lot of snafus here adjusting the video, but I'll get the hang of it. I promise I'll get the hang of it. I owe it to my guests. We can't have technical issues like we did today. It was a little bit too much, but be sure to follow them and obviously watch this video whenever you get the time. And yeah, guys, talk to you guys down the line.